So I'm with the Washington State Department of Ecology, and I manage our public participation grant program. And I also am the application manager for a couple of other projects that funds that are distributed through the Solid Waste Management Division. I'm gonna try and make my slides go. All right, the Public Participation Grant Program is 34 years old. If you haven't heard of it, it's been around for a little while. Basically, the legislature in 1988 was smart and said, let's put 1% of the state's Model Toxic Control Act revenue into a fund to engage the public in issues of waste management. The project funds solid waste management, the program funds solid waste management projects, and it also funds prevention and cleanup of environmental hazards. So as I say, it's the whole spectrum of waste. We've got nuclear waste, we've got hazardous waste, we've got recycling, we've got reduction and repair, we've got all the waste stuff in the Public Participation Grant Program. Individual awards are up to $60,000 a year based on reimbursable expenses. There's an option for a second year renewal. So one application, one award can get 2 years of funding. And the funding is eligible for both individuals and nonprofit organizations. So applicants are not competing with local governments or businesses for this pool of money. All the money is state money. It's not, none of it is federal. So you have one set of requirements. I know it's not always easy, but at least it's one set and not two. Applications that are prioritized in the evaluation and the competition for this pool of money are: 1, projects that engage environmental justice communities; 2, projects focused on state and federal cleanup sites. So those are MOTCA sites, Superfund sites, RCRA sites. And then the third category for prioritization is new applicants. In the last funding cycle, we had 36 applications. We awarded 32 of them. And if you'll see on the right side of the screen, there was $3,700,000 available in this fund. And there was about $33,500,000 requested, leaving a fund balance of about $200,000. State revenues that were available to the nonprofit sector. So that was the last application cycle. Going forward, I don't know what these numbers will be, but I certainly would love to have zero money left. I would love to get all of this support to individuals and nonprofits working to engage the public in waste management. I fund projects statewide. Well, we fund projects statewide out of this grant. And this is just to show that there's a wide variety of things. I could have done sort of many different ways of looking at this, but I talked earlier, there's organics waste, there's issues of waste in our water, in our Puget Sound, in our streams and rivers, and our lakes. There's issues of water, of contamination in our stormwater, and even in our rain with PFAS. So, and then we have solid waste reduction, and then toxic cleanup are those projects that really focus on a site that's contaminated, and that's a part of a regulated cleanup process. So again, a wide variety. The next funding cycle is coming up, and I'm really looking forward to this next 6 months. Starting in January and February, I'll be doing outreach, support with grant development, and helping potential applicants think through their projects. In March, the request for applications will open. Department of Ecology will evaluate in April and May, make awards. We will contract in June, and then projects should start in July of 2023. I have here a person that I have talked several times with about grant writing and grant management, and I have not worked with her as a recipient of her services, but she gave me this list of all these different foundations that potentially also support tool libraries and repair events. Obviously, you would have to review these yourselves, but I just thought I'm going to drop this in here as another potential resource and service and another list. You know, you don't have to go on Foundation Database or foundationcenter.com, that these might work for your program. And then before I get to that, I want to quickly give a couple tips. I feel like there's been a lot of sort of business sales today, and I don't want to be all business. I want to leave you with something right away that's of value. So I just want to give you some tips. I have spent 20 years in the nonprofit sector before I came to the Department of Ecology. I have written so many grants. I have reviewed so many grants, and here's a couple tips. Start early. Call the number and ask your questions and talk about your project to the funder. Everything has a name, a person, and a phone number. Ask for all the money. If you are eligible, if it's up to 20,000 or up to 60,000 or up to 2 million, just go ahead and ask for it. And then if they have a question in the application and your organization isn't doing that yet, talk about what you might do if you were given the money. So let's say they want a quality risk assessment plan and you don't have that. Talk about how you will develop one before you get the, after you get the award. And then the last question is just go for it. I guess my last piece of my last tip is to, as I said, call and ask. I'm available and would be happy to talk with all of you about my grant and the different programs at Ecology. We have another similar fund called the Waste Reduction Recycling Education Grant, and I can definitely see if that one would be a fit for you as well. Both grants are competitively evaluated and scored, so there's no guarantee, but you definitely won't get the money if you don't call, ask the questions, and submit the application. Thanks for your time.
Excellent. Thanks, Faith. And Allie, would you like to go next?
Sorry, on mute. Yeah, absolutely. Give me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, hopefully you all can see that now, right? Great, fantastic. So hi, everybody. My name is Allie Blum, and I am the Grants Program Manager with King County Solid Waste Division. And I know we have folks from different parts of the Pacific Northwest country. So for those who may not know, King County is Washington State's most populous county, encompassing the Seattle metropolitan area, as well as suburban and rural communities. And I'm super excited to share information with you all about the RE+ Circular Economy Grant. It's a new grant program that the Solid Waste Division established this year. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit of background that helps demonstrate how this grant program fits into the work of the Solid Waste Division. We recently launched the RE+ initiative, which is the county's plan for achieving zero waste of resources to the landfill by 2030. And to do this, we need to minimize our environmental impacts and move towards a zero waste circular economy. And there's several reasons that we need RE+ right now. One, as you all know, sending waste to our landfills contributes to climate change. And at our current pace, we are set to fill up Cedar Hills Regional Landfill, which is King County's only landfill, by 2040. And so by reducing waste and increasing recycling, we can extend the life of that landfill and avoid taking on new disposal options, which will be very costly. So here is just a simplified picture of our solid waste system in King County. In 2019, about 1.8 million tons of garbage and recycling were generated in King County. And the good news is that 1 million tons of this was recycling, so we're recycling more than we're throwing away. But the bad news is 70% of what is going to our landfill right now has value and could be recovered or and turned into new resources. So the second column here shows how things could look like in 2030 if we're successful with 3+. And you can see that to hit our zero waste of resources goals, we need to successfully recycle more. And I think what this group is probably more interested in, we really also need to reduce our waste through waste prevention efforts. So a little bit about our grants. The goal of the RE+ Circular Economy Grant is to support projects that promote a more circular economy and help us reach our goal of zero waste of resources. So this grant is open to businesses, CBOs, nonprofits, tribal governments, universities and colleges, and self-employed individuals. We have about $2 million worth of funding to award out across 2 years. The minimum funding amount for this grant is $20,000, and we fund a maximum up to $300,000 per project. And one important eligibility consideration to keep in mind for this specific opportunity is that projects have to have an impact on King County's solid waste system. So this excludes projects in the city of Seattle and Milton because they operate on a different solid waste system, and as a government, our dollars are very tied to our own system. This grant program has 3 priority materials, and those are paper, plastics, and organics. And organics does include wood. And the reason that we prioritize these materials is because they make up 2/3 of what we're seeing in our landfill. So there's a huge opportunity to recycle these materials or prevent waste in the first place. And that's why you'll see prevention and reuse and recycling as the 2 buckets for our focus area. So projects that focus on repair are likely eligible. For example, this last grant cycle, we funded a project that repaired or refurbished furniture that otherwise would have been landfill. And because furniture is often made of wood or plastic, we considered it to address priority materials. And that's not to say that we don't fund projects that aren't focused on public or on the priority materials, because we do, but we can only award a maximum number of points to projects that touch on those 3 categories. So these were the evaluation criteria for our 2022 cycle, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through them. But you can see that these are the broad areas that the questions in our grant application focus on. And so each application is scored out of 100 points, and this is a breakdown of how those points are allocated across different criteria. And so in this grant, the initiative summary, environmental and climate impact, and equitable impact are weighted the most highly. So for the timeline for this grant, as I mentioned before, we had our first cycle open in 2022, and those projects will run through the end of 2023. We know that we are going to be offering this grant again in the next biennium, but we haven't finalized when we'll next open this grant cycle. I would anticipate that it would be sometime late in 2023, with those projects running through the end of 2025. I did include some rough estimates for timing on various stages because I think it's important to know that in contracting with a government agency, our process for reviewing applications and getting contracts signed can be a bit lengthy. So I would expect between submitting a grant application to having the award, a contract signed, and work beginning on projects to be at minimum a 3 to 4 month process. And this is just a quick by the number slide for our 2022 cycle. So in 2022, we received 14 applications and funded 14 projects. 2 of those were really specifically focused on repair. And we funded projects that ranged from $75,000 up to the maximum of $300,000. 80% of the funding was awarded for projects that addressed the paper, plastic, and organics priority materials, and the other 20% was for projects that addressed other materials more generally. I think you all are probably most interested in the prevention and reuse focus area, and this last year, over half of our funding went to fund that type of project as opposed to recycling. So if you all, I know we have time for questions a little later, but if you have any questions or if you want to be notified when this grant opportunity is next available, please don't hesitate to reach out. This email goes to me and I would love to discuss more with you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Allie. Hey, Allie, while Liz is speaking, can you put that your email address in the chat? And there was a question for you in the chat. So if you want to kind of go back a little bit and just kind of review that, and then we're going to kick it over to Liz.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Tara. Let's see. Can I have screen sharing capabilities?
You should have them. Allie, would you mind? Yeah, great.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Liz Start. I'm here with the NextCycle Washington project. I'm excited to be part of this group. Just really great to hear everyone yesterday and to see some familiar folks on the call today. So I'm with Start Consulting Group, and so we focus on a lot of projects in the reuse and repair and share economy, and with a focus on equity and inclusion in those projects. And that's part of what drew me to the NextCycle Washington project, which we'll talk about. So this was our inaugural year of starting this project, and we're very grateful to our funding partners that include King County, Department of Commerce, Ecology, Seattle Public Utilities, and then the Washington Recycling Development Center, and then the consulting groups that are make up the internal team for NextCycle Washington are Cascadia Consulting Group, Traversal, RRS, and Start Consulting Group. So what is NextCycle? It's a program within Washington that provides networking, mentoring, and access to different funding pathways to help circular businesses and projects really grow and thrive, because we want to see, folks that are investing a lot of time and resources into these projects really succeed at this. And I know there's at least 2 of our NextCycle accelerator teams on the call. So there's 2 different ways to participate in NextCycle as a participant. So we have what's called the Circular Accelerator, and this is designed to support and advance circular business and also nonprofit and other projects. Our cohort is underway. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we're in the process of planning, hopefully, a 2023 cohort as well. And the next way to participate is with the Renew Seed grant. So we just finished our application process for this year, but again, we're also planning on that project for next year to see some funding that goes out. So this is a really great starting point for folks who are just getting ready to start a project or scale a project, and again, to help them get some of that seed funding to see them grow. So the Circular Accelerator, so we have 14 teams, but I think for the downstream cohort, we'll count an extra, but I'll explain that in a moment. But just to focus on the upstream cohort, I'm one of the upstream co-leads. And so this focuses on projects that are in the reuse, repair, and share economy, and anything that's elevating waste and keeping it out of the system of recycling or waste. And then the downstream is more focused on recycling and organics. And then I had mentioned the teams, which this is part of the benefit of being part of NextCycle, is that the 2 glass projects decided to combine forces and work together. So with the NextCycle Washington Accelerator, part of the goal is to get our teams networking, working together, really looking at how they can share resources and energy. And then with that, we have a workshop series where they go through 8 different workshop trainings that really help them delve into whether they're a business or a nonprofit, really putting together a plan to ensure success. And then it will all culminate in what's called a pitch showcase, which we'll have in March in the Seattle area, where they can really show you, share their projects really clearly and succinctly. And so it'll be a pitch competition. So the upstream team, there'll be one upstream team and one downstream team that can win $10,000 through this pitch competition. So they'll be judged by a panel of experts. So it'll be exciting to see some of our teams win those prizes. So part of this is, acknowledging success and really building equity and inclusion throughout. And that has been through a co-design process where community was brought in early to this project to ensure equity and inclusion and justice throughout. So we saw that in the applications that came through. And so, we have a lot of BIPOC and women-owned projects that are part of the accelerator, and then one disability owned. So, it's really important that we're looking at how we're making sure that we're building inclusion into this process. So, one of the gaps we did identify is that, we kind of see everything in that Puget Sound area. So we want, especially for the accelerator, we want to go beyond that and see, folks throughout the state really, be part of this accelerator. And again, that goes back to that accessibility and stuff. And so we learned a lot from that process, which took us to the Renew Seed grants, which is where the funding comes in. So Renew Seed grants are up to $10,000 in reimbursable funding available to projects throughout the state. And along with that funding also comes one-on-one coaching and mentorship to really, again, help those projects succeed and grow. And we want to see them move on to the next phase. And our hope is that those projects will then kind of be our applicants for the next circular accelerator. So they also get, connected with folks throughout the state and even across the country to really help them grow their projects and really, build in that networking part of things. So we are hopefully going to be announcing our our grant awardees in early January. And so those projects will run through January through next June. And then hopefully, don't quote me on this, next fall or so, we'll get to see another round of Renew Seed grants. But it has to be a Washington-based project and expanding to Washington. It also has to work with waste that's based in Washington or materials that are based in Washington. And so it can be a number of projects that are eligible, research projects, feasibility studies, pilots, et cetera. And then, the great thing, especially with this work in the repair economy, a lot of it is nonprofit and community driven. So those projects are included and eligible for that, which is really exciting to see. And really too, another thing that I love about this is for the reuse and repair economy is, bringing kind of that business lens and really helping organizations expand on what they're doing through that mentorship side of things. And then this Renew Seed grant will cover things like marketing, consulting, feasibility studies, supplies and materials. And then there's some nuanced things, kind of like was just presented, projects within King County have, King County funding and have different eligible expenses than other projects throughout the state. So I mentioned the co-design process with this, and that's part of lowering barriers to make sure that we're creating accessibility for everyone to be able to participate in this, especially, BIPOC folks, women-owned or run organizations and rural areas as well. I think there's a real need for repair and reuse systems throughout, in rural areas. So it's exciting to see, we got to see a lot of rural projects that came through with this last round of the seed grant funding. So as far as that goes, we really beefed up the support from what we learned through the accelerator process. And so with the Renew Seed grant, what we did was we tried to provide as much information as possible, interpretation, translation services as needed. We held office hours to provide one-on-one support for folks to help them work through their application process. We had application parties, so folks could come to a big call and get their questions answered or speak one-on-one with some of our internal team. And then we had application mentors, which Cami is one of our mentors, which is great. She's also part of the co-design and program governance. And then one thing that we found was to kind of help with that gap to move beyond the Puget Sound was that we needed to have mentors and trusted messengers throughout the state. And so we worked to find folks throughout the region to kind of help with specific projects, which was great. So we saw a lot more Eastern Washington, Central, and Southwest Washington projects come through for the seed grant applications, which was great. And that a lot of that is due to these great trusted messengers that we were able to work with. And then I will say too, since I know not everyone is Washington based, that there is a NextCycle program in Michigan and in Colorado that's pretty similar. Of course, Washington is the best of the NextCycle programs, but there are also those projects. So it's exciting to be part of this and see all these projects come and really build up the circular economy in the state of Washington. And then if you'd like, you can scan this lovely QR code. I think that takes you to our website. You can also follow NextCycle Washington on LinkedIn, and I can drop these links in the chat. And then too, you can also fill out a get involved form, even if you're just, maybe not interested in being part of the accelerator or the seed grant, but you're just interested in learning more about NextCycle. You can get more information through our newsletters. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. 3 fantastic presentations. You guys did a really fantastic job of covering the what and the wow, the where and the how and the why and all of that.
Liz, I had a question, and I don't expect you to know the answer to this actually, but do you know if NextCycle is planning on expanding beyond the 3 states?
I think that is their goal. So I am actually in Oregon, and I would love to see a NextCycle Oregon, or even a Northwest NextCycle. But I think, and it is actually a project that was started by RRS Consulting Group, which their website is recycle.com, if that tells you how long they've been in the business, that they were able to get that domain. But yeah, so they, I think they would love to expand and see more states take on this program. So I haven't heard of anything solid yet, but I've heard through the grapevine that they're in conversation with some different states.
Cool. Wonderful news. And I'm going back through the chat because I wasn't monitoring that.
I don't know if people have specific questions, and you're more than welcome to shout them out. But if you also just want to say things about grants, or ask us to riff on grants or complain about grants or any of that, it just kind of gets the conversation started. So don't hesitate.
Well, the floor is open. If folks want to raise hands, I think I see Will. Will, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, so I'm with Zero Waste Fashion, I'm a board member, and we have a fairly well-established 6-year track record of pretty big accomplishments with King County. But we're looking at the potential for starting a reuse facility on island. And it's difficult because we are unincorporated, so we don't have municipal governments or anything else to sort of direct funding or taxation or anything. So my question is, we have done the basic interviewing part with carpenters and construction people and designers, and they want a reuse facility, they would use it, but we also want it to be socially equitable so that it provides resources for people that are building tiny homes or building things. They don't have large incomes to provide shelter or repair. So my question is really, where do we start for this? We've interviewed people, we know the desire's there. We want to have success in doing something like this, but we know that we need time to develop inventory. We don't know how to pay a staff because if it's really not bringing in a lot of money, it may just pay the rent. And yet you need a minimum of 1 or 2 people. So what steps do we start so that we heading down the grant process to make something like this happen?
Lightweight question.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, to do that assessment of your current capacity, your current resources and assets, and then where you want to be, and then your grant kind of fills in the in-between, and that becomes your narrative and your budget. So you already have some things, you have information, you have and people who want to be participants, you maybe have people who want to be volunteers, you have a lot of things already. You have a record as an organization, you have a board that does your governance. So you have a bunch of staff, and then you want to do a new thing. So really, what's your kind of business plan for that new thing? Write up that, and then use that to apply to as many funders as you can until you get the awards you need to make your thing happen. That's kind of my.
So really, that's where we're at. We've got a draft business plan. This is not my profession. So I'm in unknown watery. So, but I clearly want to see this go forward. So is there assistance essentially for reviewing like a business plan, poking holes at it, making sure that this is a feasible plan?
That sounds like a Liz question to me.
So what I'm thinking of is Washington Department of Commerce has My Startup 365. And it's very business heavy, but they have a lot of resources on there on kind of getting that part started, information on business planning to kind of help you with that. I believe they probably have some assistance lines, but I'm not sure as far as nonprofits go. But I will say too, if you all get further along, if you apply to be part for a Renew Seed grant in the coming year, or to be part of the Circular Accelerator, we do a lot of one-on-one consulting and helping folks review their business plan. We do a circular canvas to kind of help you build out, the circularity of your project, and then also look at all those business things too. And I know a lot of times with this work, it's so volunteer intensive at the beginning until you can really build something up. But I think it's, just continuing to, I don't know why he says this, but my spouse says, how do you eat a whale one bite at a time? And so I think there's a lot of that going on too with the type of work that you're doing.
Allie, do you have any thoughts?
I just said one thing I was going to add, that at least for the RE+ Circular Economy grants, we funded projects that are in all stages of development. So some that are still in the research development stage, some that are, pretty fully baked and want to scale. We funded, phases of a project that are expected to go across years. And so I would say, even if you are still in the planning stage, you should absolutely consider submitting an application with what you have and where you want to go, because that's what our grant is for, to help fill in that gap to help you get to your vision.
I appreciate that. We have a good track record of partnership with King County and a good legacy of success. So we'd like to continue that.
Pamela, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you for you all coming, and this is really great. I have gotten so much information. We are in Seattle in the Southeast area. It's called the Giving Root Project, and it began this year, and basically we're doing a lot of making sure that anything doesn't go into the landfill, and we try to repurpose whatever it is. We try to give it away, and we try to make sure that it's working before we even give it to anyone. So it's really new. But I have a couple questions, and they're really quick. We went for the recycle, the one you're doing, Allie, and we didn't get it. And so, are we able to figure out why we didn't get the grants?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a fantastic question. So when we sent out our awards, we tried to give a little bit of feedback, but you're absolutely welcome to email us and set up a time to talk to somebody who evaluated your application, and we would be more than happy to have a conversation about areas that we see for opportunities for improvement, or the strengths that we really saw. Would really love to do that.
Okay. I mean, because it could have just been something simple. We just felt like what we were trying to do, it should have fit right in there. Somebody else could have been like, right at the same as us, and they just ended up getting it before us. I mean, we don't have a clue of why, but myself and a gentleman by the name of Jabari Rashidi, we are both kind of doing this together with, trying to make sure preventing waste from going into the landfill. And then Faith, I was just wondering, this grant that you were speaking of, is this a grant that's right now that we could fill out for, or is this a grant that is coming up in 2023?
Yeah, thanks for that. So it is, we're not open right now to accept applications, but I will be open in March to accept applications. And sometime in February, I'll publish the program guidelines, which will have all of the questions in it listed that you'll need to respond to, and all the materials you'll need to submit with the application. And I hope you apply, and I love Allie's response and willingness to talk with you. And I think anyone who writes a grant and doesn't get it, to call and learn and get that feedback. There should be a standardized evaluation form that every grant, review process uses. And so to get that for your grant will probably give you a lot of good information about maybe your project, but maybe just your application development as well. So encourage you all to think about that as well as you're trying to improve your awards.
So that person, Ashley, I think it's Ashley Knapp that was up. It's a grant writer, Cammie?
Yeah, I assume that the presentation deck will go out and people can kind of delve into that a little bit more. But Ashley she's not affiliated with me at all. She's a private consultant who has, talked to me before about the grant that I manage, the public participation grant. And when I told her I was coming on this conversation today, she sent me that list of foundations that she thinks might be interested in the kind of work you do. And I wanted to share that information with all of you. And I wanted to give her credit for putting the list together. So I included her information in my presentation. But yeah, she's a private consultant who writes grants for under contract.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Yeah, that slide was pretty exciting because we're all wondering about diversifying our funding streams. If no one else has immediate questions, I have a couple of questions, but I'm happy to wait if somebody, Train, please. And you're muted, it seems.
Sorry. Okay. Could Giving Room give us a one-sentence description of what they're about?
Question for you.
Basically what the title is saying, the Giving Room Project, it was, we basically get all of our donations from the community, and we give out everything that that we get, and it's for free. And we have a trailer that is at the facility where everything is given out from. It's in the southeast area of Seattle, what they call Columbia City. And we have a trailer that kind of advertises for us very well. And so the community comes by there at any time. Matter of fact, it's open 24/7 in regards to food, but in regards to the clothing and whatever else is brought there, we're still in the process of trying to figure out how we want to do that for this year.
Thank you.
And we've actually partnered with the Giving Room during one of our previous Fix-It fairs. So they brought the trailer to the event, set it up outside, and our participants, our fixers, anybody could go over to the trailer and check out what there was to be had, grab what they needed. So it's a version of doing something like a really, really free market or a take it or leave it within your larger fix-it event. And I strongly recommend doing that. It's a great crowd management opportunity. Like people are waiting, maybe getting a little bored and antsy. So direct them over to the really free market or the giving room, so that they can peruse what's available, and a way for people to say, I don't need this thing any longer, but maybe somebody else does. Anybody, any other questions? Because then I'll ask some questions.
Thank you, Cammie, for expounding on that.
So the three of you touched a little bit on, well, actually, I think Faith specifically called it out, sort of alignment. And I think as a grantee, one of the things that we struggle with is the different requirements for different grants, even though it's like often the same projects. So I believe, if I remember correctly, NextCycle was trying to align a little bit more, or maybe that was aspirational to align with the RE+ grant, so that some of it, there was a lower burden on the grant writer, or the grant writing team. I use that very loosely. Could any of you speak to sort of streamlining the applying for grants process? Are there any sort of larger collaborative efforts to make that easier for all of us to apply for more things?
I will say I did a study last year with the city of Portland, reuse, repair, and share needs assessment. And a lot of what came up with all of those organizations, which were all nonprofits, was, all the barriers that come in with grant writing, especially when you're doing repair and reuse and share work. You already are so stretched for capacity. So it's simplifying. So I think that it is, the burden should be on the grant writer of how are we reducing barriers to make it more accessible. I will say Oregon Metro, one thing that I like in their grant process is they kind of do basically like a short application that they can review and kind of help folks, give them comments on what they need to adjust in order to, to apply for the full grant before they're asking for all of those things like your financials and really digging in deep. So then that way it's, the grant writers feel like it's worth their time, especially like on the nonprofit side of things, for our industry or for the work that we all do is, we can't afford grant writers, right? And so simplifying the process. And so I think that it's continuing, just to work with grant organizations or groups that give out grants to simplify that. And I think too, like, especially with NextCycle, like learning a lot through the process. And Kamal Patel, who was on the call yesterday, he's done a lot of great work on really surveying, getting data, getting input and feedback from organizations and applicants on how we can simplify the process, because sometimes, it's easy to get jargony or like, oh, it'd be good to have this information and, and then, it's not just applying for the grant, it's all the follow-up requirements as well with reporting. So I think that, the onus should be on the grant organizations. And so it's just continuing to push for that and have conversations around that. And I really love that with NextCycle Washington and RE+ and, with ecology and, that, trying to think about that, how can we reduce barriers and make it more accessible?
I don't know if you have thoughts, Ali. I could go, but I want to make sure there's time for you too.
Go ahead. I can follow.
So I put this on that one slide, like ask for help, right? Call that number and talk to that human who's managing that grant and say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I don't understand. What do I need to know? What do I need to do? Will you look at this? Have I covered the things you want me to cover? Does this form count instead of this form? If I don't have this form, can I do an org list instead of an org chart? Ask those questions. And then 2, put yourself together a template, because pretty much every grant application wants to know who's the audience, who are you engaging in this work, who's the community, what's their demographics, and it all comes from the census, right? And like your community profile. So like write about the people. And then write about your project. You should have a logic model or a theory of change or an idea of why your project is meaningful. So write that up in a couple paragraphs. And then write up how your organization works and who your people are that are running your organization and how they represent the community and how they make decisions with the community. And just have that as a couple of pages of text that's not specific to any one grant, but that you can use to tweak those kind of minor things that come up in different grants based on that foundation or that agency. But those are kind of the main essential like components, right, of the projects. Like, what are you doing and why? And then the third, yeah. Just also to say, like, I worked for the nonprofits for a really long time, and then I worked for the agency, and like, just off the cuff here, like getting real, there's bad dudes out there who like want to exploit our money and like use it for things that are like not in the grant guidelines. And so like we ask all these questions and we ask for all this paperwork so that like the money actually goes to the projects that need it and the people who need it, and not to services that are used in different ways. So I think that there's like definitely, get to the person and like ask for help, because I think the people that are funding and who are managing these grant funds really want to do right by the community and want to support the community, and have to verify lots of things in order to ensure that, that the dollars are used as they were intended.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I keep loving something that Faith is saying, which is like reach out, like it's a person at the end, at the end of the line. And I can say for the REPlus grants, it was our first time offering this grant opportunity. And when we had those, after we had made the awards, we really did ask for feedback, and it's a genuine ask. Like, we really want feedback from people who have applied for our grants or even didn't apply because maybe the application was just looking too challenging or whatever. And we really want the grant to serve the community. And so that feedback at any stage of the application or grant award process is just so super valuable. But like Liz said, I totally agree that the onus is on us to make that happen. And then there's definitely an opportunity for more coordination, because I've also been on the nonprofit side, and it's very burdensome when you're looking at a number of funding sources.
Yes, and Liz, it's interesting because I've spoken with Xenia a little bit, and full transparency, Zero Waste Washington applied both. I don't know what it was for. I'm sure it was the furniture project, to NextCycle, and also to REPlus. And she candidly told me that the REPlus application was so much simpler than NextCycle. And I was like, oh, that's not what we had intended. Being on the other side and working through the co-design process, and then hearing some feedback and trying to tweak the application for NextCycle, like, really want to make this easy for folks. And we thought we were trying to make it easier for folks, but then I think she told me that the REPlus grant was 3 questions long. Is that real? Is she misleading me?
It's a little longer than 3 questions. And I do remember there being some like pretty intentional overlap with some of the NextCycle questions. But yeah, I'm not sure. I know we tried to streamline some of our application, but kind of like Faith was saying earlier, like, we are a government agency and we do require a good bit of info for those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think too, one of our learnings is, not necessarily taking that business accelerator kind of lens through the application process, and, just understanding a lot of the groups, they're just starting out or so fresh on the project, on their projects and stuff too. And so, yeah, that's a really good point, and something we're working towards. And, with feedback, part of, in addition to the surveys, there's some like just random interviews being conducted with folks to talk through the application process. So maybe we need to add Xenia to the list.
I told her to give that feedback just because we do want to hear and make it better. But yes, both, especially the RePlus and the NextCycle grant applications are iterative. So they're going to evolve over time with the project. Pamela.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, one of the grants was saying that that it was King County based and not Seattle. So how does that work? Because you could be in King County, right? But you could be in Seattle. Am I correct?
Yes, and that is something that is so confusing about our grant opportunity. And the reason behind that is King County has a waste system that operates separately from the city of Seattle. So in the city of Seattle, what happens to your garbage is different than what happens in the rest of King County. City of Seattle sends their garbage elsewhere, and from the rest of the county, the garbage goes to Cedar Hills Regional Landfill. So as King County Solid Waste Division, our dollars are really tied to projects that are going to divert material from the landfill through recycling or that prevention. And so projects that are working in Seattle don't meet that eligibility requirement, which is, it's a super important distinction for us and our dollars, but I totally understand that for folks on the ground doing the work, that distinction feels pretty meaningless and confusing.
So how do you, so where would it work?
Our grant funding.
Yes.
So
Just to
organizations.
give me an example so I understand.
So organizations that are working outside of Seattle, but within King County are eligible. So places in, South King, so Tukwila, SeaTac, the East Side, Bellevue, our more rural communities, Enumclaw, unincorporated areas, that, like White Center, that's considered.
Okay, I got it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Will, I think I see your hand up again.
So maybe you could help me out in understanding what is not funded by grants. It's labor, building structure. What are the limitations? And so we should not be asking for them. And
Faith,
Faith, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
maybe you're just
Every grant application, or sometimes they're called requests for proposals, or sometimes they're called guidelines, will have a list of eligible and ineligible expenses or costs. And that will detail what is available for funding. For example, in public participation grants, I can't fund capital expenses. So if you have something you want to buy that's more than $5,000, I can't reimburse you for that in my grant, but I can reimburse salary, overhead, printing, lots of other expenses that are all listed in the guidelines.
For NextCycle, we're kind of unique, and it kind of goes along with Pamela's question because part of the funding comes from King County, so it's the same requirements as the RePlus grant that Allie was speaking about. And then stuff that's funded by Department of Commerce, I think has a little bit more restrictions on what can be funded. But as far as the NextCycle Renew Seed grant, it includes consulting services. It does include labor. You can also include like marketing stuff, or if you need flyers, things like that, website development, any kind of supplies and materials. But then anything outside of King County does, and except Seattle and Milton, equipment is not eligible. So, or any capital expense in that regard. But within King County, there are a little bit of, I think like you can include like rent and some equipment purchases, but that are eligible for the Renew Seed grant.
so I'm like, the reason I'm asking is that to get a reuse facility, we need infrastructure, we need racks and storage and things like that. And so I just want to understand the scope and not go for an ask that is going to be out of the bounds.
Yeah, for the RE+ grants in King County, those types of expenses are definitely eligible expenses. And like Faith mentioned, we have grant guidelines that outline what's not considered an eligible expense. And for the RE+ grants, it's pretty open. It's capital, staff time, marketing, any sort of capacity building support. I think the things that we deemed ineligible were like bad debts, the cost of like social activities or lodging, like meals, things like that. So it's pretty open.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to look into some of the funding available through that list that Faith offered earlier. That could be very interesting to see what is fundable and what's not, because it's likely to be different across the board. Some people will totally fund capital expenses, which is great. And operations support, strongly encourage anybody to look for operations support, because they are few and far between, but when they are there, they are like gold. Let's see. Oh, there was a question that I wanted to follow up with, and it is gone right now. Caps on number of times you can apply for a grant for any of these. That's open for anybody.
Our grant, no cap. If you applied and didn't get a grant, like Pamela was bringing up, I definitely encourage you to reach out, have a conversation, please apply again. We just had so many grants, a lot of excellent applications that weren't funded, so I would encourage you to keep trying. And if you have received an award, you're still eligible in the future.
Liz or Faith?
PPG, the public participation grants fund one project up to $60,000. Well, fund projects up to $60,000 a year, and you can submit for more than one project. And did you have a second part of your question that I'm missing, Cami, or was that it?
No, just if people are funded, like can they apply multiple times? Can they be funded more than once?
Oh, yes. So public participation grants do award extra points to new applicants. So trying to kind of seed newer organizations to also get going. So there is a priority for new applicants, but long-standing organizations are also, welcome in the program. And as I showed on that slide, I had a fund balance, so I would have been able to fund kind of new and returning applicants.
And so it would be based more on the project versus the organization. So the organization could apply multiple times, but they would need to have a new project.
Yeah, yeah.
That was my question. Good job, Cami.
That was a voice from beyond.
That was me. Sorry, I'm so sorry. It was just a weird voice. I was excited.
Liz, NextCycle. I don't know if NextCycle is old enough to have a.
We're not. We're a little baby in the grant world. But I will say, the focus is on, planting seeds. And so we are focused on new projects for Renew Seed grant funding. So if you've applied and for some reason you don't get it, we do encourage you to continue to apply. If you do get funding and you want to apply again, it would have to be for a new project, because we're looking at, how do we plant as many seeds in the circular economy as possible? So you can apply multiple times, but it has to be a new and fresh project that has not been funded yet.
Thank you. Mark. Oh.
Hi, this one is for Faith, and I'm just reading essentially the program guidelines because I'm really interested in learning more about the public participation grant. Just kind of adding on to, I believe, Will's question, as far as what would be considered an eligible cost for at least the year 21 to 23, their guidelines. If say he did need racks or something to store the materials needed to complete his project, would that not be something under like the supply guidelines as an eligible cost?
Did you say racks? RACKS? Yeah.
Yes.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Just to like store items, yes.
Yeah, so equipment is an eligible expense for public participation grants. So we define equipment as items that have a useful life of more than a year and a dollar unit price of less than $5,000. I think it's 5,000. It might have been 1,000 in the last cycle, but it should be listed. But yeah, so you could, get racks. You could organize, your space. You could buy a software like those software tracking systems that were talked about earlier.
Understood.
That would all be eligible.
And just sorry, further clarification. Now, if say he needed, for instance, like 4 or 5 of them to house all the equipment, would he be able to file those as like individually under $5,000, or would you have to file that as one? Basically saying like all the racks and all like cumulatively they're over $5,000, but individually they're under.
This is where like gap accounting practices are just like, well, mind blowing. But like, so if you ordered one package that had 5 racks and it was all one box and it was delivered together and purchased together for $6,000, then that would not be eligible. But if you ordered 5 boxes, and this is horrible, right? Packaging problems.
Yeah.
But then, if they were individual units, then it would be less than $5,000, and that would be eligible.
Okay, thank you. Probably an overly technical question, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's the thing about grants is like it's big vision, big picture, and then it's also like really detailed. And so you kind of have to like steel your heart to hang in both spaces. I appreciate the question.
There are options for used racks too, when it comes to warehousing and former, retired racks and things. I don't know if you're in Tacoma, I can only see part of this, but there's Mr. Racks is in Pierce and North and King County.